Hi everyone. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing adding a watermark to your PDF output. The main topics of our discussion today are listed here. We'll be reviewing various considerations for designing your watermark, how you want to design it and where you want to place it on the page. We'll then be getting into the technical details of how to actually implement your watermark in your customized PDF style sheets. And finally, we'll be discussing optional watermarks, modifying display of the watermark based on various requirements. So we'll be starting with watermark design. We'll discuss what a watermark is. We'll discuss where the various places are that you might want to place it in the page margin, or how you might want to design it as a background or an overlay to the document. What is a watermark? Traditional watermarks most of us are familiar with these from a lot of different areas. Faint imprints on paper that can only be seen at a specific angle. There are watermarks in cash bills and legal documents, and that's something that's actually embedded into the paper. The watermarks that we'll be discussing today are watermarks in presentation software, which is often an image or text used as a background. Not actually embedded in the paper, but something included with the text. It is meant to enhance, but not to be the main point of focus. So these are just a quick background to what to keep in mind, what your goal is when designing your watermark. Think of something that will enhance the text, but not be the main point of focus on the page. One way that you might want to design your watermark is by placing it in the page margin. A watermark can be included as part of the header or footer. Most PDF documents will already have a header or footer on most of the pages. And a watermark might just be included as part of the running header or footer throughout the document. It might be a company logo, it might be some text, and it's just right there in the header or footer, maybe a little faded in the background, but part of the existing header or footer. A watermark can also be included in the side margin and rotated to fit. Here on the bottom, you see an example of this. They've got some watermark text, internal use only, in the side margins, rotated so that it fits. How would we do this? In order to rotate the text on the page, wrap the block of text in an FO block container and provide the angle of rotation in the reference orientation attribute. Here on the left, you see the code snippet. FO block container, position equals absolute. Here's the important attribute that we're discussing right now. Reference orientation equals 90. That takes the block of text that says internal use only and rotates it 90 degrees so that it fits neatly into the page margin. Left and height are just specifying examples of how it's specifying where to place it on the page. So those are a couple different ways you might want to include the watermark in the page margin, either as the header or footer or in the side margin, rotated to fit. Another way you might want to include your watermark is right along with the text in the middle of the page. In that case, it would be either a background or an overlay to the text. So we'll go over the different options and the pros and cons of each one. If the watermark is placed behind the text, it will be partially blocked by the text and mostly blocked by large images. To prevent this, the watermark can be created as a transparent image and placed above the text so that both text and watermark will be clearly visible. So if you want your watermark to be shown, all parts of your watermark to be shown on every page, then you'll need to make sure that it's lying above the text. The image background should be completely transparent, and the foreground partially transparent to ensure that your text can be seen. And this is something that's set when actually creating the image in the image editor. The degree of opacity should be chosen in order to hide or highlight watermark as desired. So if you're looking to just have a very faint logo that's lying over the text, you want to make sure that to choose a very high degree of transparency when creating the image. If it's a big draft watermark that says draft written all across it and the idea is to make it difficult to read, then you'll want to make the watermark more opaque. However, if the watermark lies above the text in an FO block container, this can cause difficulty for authors editing the file in Adobe Acrobat. So if you've got a big image lying on top of your text and someone needs to edit that text, they won't be able to access the text in order to edit it. So if this is a consideration for you and your authors will need to be editing the text that's lying underneath the watermark, then you'll want to take this into consideration and consider a different way, either a background or in the margins, to include your watermark so that this doesn't become a problem. So we've gone over briefly different considerations in watermark design. We've discussed what is a watermark. We've discussed placing the watermark in the page margin or designing it as a background or an overlay. Now we're going to start to get technical. We're going to discuss how to take each of those possible scenarios for including the watermark that we discussed in the previous section, whether it's in the header or footer, as an overlay, in the side margins, as a background, and how to actually implement that in the PDF style sheets. I'm going to be assuming that most of you have background in customizing the DITA OT's PDF style sheets. Anyone who doesn't is welcome to look up the free webinars on our website that discuss that in detail. But I will be providing some background as we go along to different specific sections of the style sheets for those of you who are less familiar with it. So anyone who is already familiar with it, just bear with me, and we'll be getting to the specific watermark discussions pretty quickly. What are we going to be discussing in this section? We'll be discussing inclusion in static content, which is one use case of how to implement the scenario. We'll be giving a quick overview of what static content is, discussing how to implement it in the headers or footers. We'll be giving an overview of what regions are and how they work in the style sheets, discussing how to implement the watermark in the side margins and how to implement it as an overlay. Then we'll be getting to including the watermark as a background to text. In order to discuss that, we'll be giving a quick overview of layout masters in the style sheets, and then we'll be getting to the specific details of how to include the watermark as the background. So we'll start with an overview of static content. What is it in general? What is it in the PDF style sheets? And how do we work with it? So content inserted by the style sheet, unrelated to source data, is called static content. Then you've got your PDF, so you've got the source data being turned into the PDF output, going through the document. And you also have different pieces on details in the PDF that are just being inserted by the style sheets and are not coming directly from the source data or from the source data document order at all. So this includes the headers and footers that are running through the document on each page. It might include a logo, a title, a document title, a page number, etc. The static content in the PDF style sheets is divided up in two ways. The first way is that it's divided by document section. That means that the TOC, the table of contents, the main body, the index, the glossary, etc., can all have distinct static content. And this is an important feature in the DITA OT because it means that it'll give the option of providing different static content for different sections of the document. You might want different page numbering in the front matter and in the body of the document. Roman numerals in the beginning and regular numbering in the body. You might want certain titles appearing in the body that don't appear in the front matter or the back matter. A lot of different possibilities for why you might want the different document sections to have distinct static content from each other. The static content is also divided by page position in the style sheets. That means that odd and even pages, first pages, and last pages in each section can all differ from each other. And this also is an important feature because it very often is necessary when designing your PDF output. For example, the first page of a chapter might not have a header. The last page of a chapter, if it's blank, or the last page of any section, might not have any static contents at all. It might just be a blank page and without any titles or headers or footers. So this, however, these two features, when you do want something to appear throughout the entire section or throughout the entire document, can be a slight disadvantage because instead of implementing something in one place, you have to implement it in a number of places. You'll have to implement it in the XSL templates for each section, and you'll have to implement it in the XSL templates for each page position of each section. So instead of, if you want, let's say, a company logo to be included in the footer of every single page, then you'll need to add it not only to one template, but you might need to add it to 5 or 10 or 12 templates to make sure it actually gets everywhere. The files that are used to set this up, to organize this in the DITA OT, are called static contents.xsl and static contents adders.xsl. Static contents.xsl includes templates that address each of the above scenarios. So you'll have a template that includes the odd page header of the body, and a template that includes the even page footer of the body, and a template that includes the first page header and footer of the table of contents, and so forth throughout the entire document. Watermarks should be processed in each of the relevant templates. As we just mentioned, if you include a watermark in your header or footer, you need to, or anywhere in your static content, you need to be sure that you're including it in each of the templates, in each of the relevant templates, so that it gets on every single page that you want it to get to. Design attributes for watermarks should be included in the relevant attribute sets in static content adder.xsl. So throughout the DITA OT style sheets, they are organized into template files and attribute set files. It makes for better organization to separate the actual functionality in the templates and the styling, formatting, and attribute sets separately, and the attribute sets are then referenced from the template files. Static content is no exception. It's organized into 2 files, and any changes you make should be done accordingly in the appropriate file. We'll step away from this for a moment and go and actually see some of the default files just to get a feel for what we've been talking about. So I know there's a little bit of a lag in the screen sharing. I'm just going to wait a moment for everyone to see the files that I'm showing. Okay, so by now you should all see I have a file open called static content.xsl. This is the file we were discussing that contains all the XSL templates for the static content. It's the default file in one of the newer versions of the DITA OT, non-customized. So you can see, for example, that there's a template here on the top called insert body static contents. This is inserting all the static contents of the body meaning the main part of the document, not the front cover, not the table of contents, not the index. And it's calling all these additional templates that each one inserts a different part of the body's static contents. It's inserting body odd footer, body even footer, body odd header, body even header, body first footer, body last header, body last footer. Each of the positions that we described. Scrolling down, you see another template called insert TOC, table of contents, static contents, doing the same exact thing. Odd footer, odd header, even header. It seems that the default template for the table of contents assumes that you don't have special static content for the first page and the last page, and of course this can be changed along with everything else when you're customizing. Moving on to the next file, static content adder.xsl. This is the file that works together with static content of XSL that we just saw. And you see that here are many different attribute sets defined. Each attribute set is a collection of attributes, text align, end indent, space before. It can include font attributes, anything related to style and formatting goes in here, and these attribute sets are referenced from the templates in static contents at XSL that we just saw. I'll just wait a moment for everyone's screens to catch up with mine. So we gave an overview of static content and how it works generally in the DITA OT without mentioning anything specific to watermarks. Now we'll go into some of the different scenarios of how your watermark might be designed and how to implement each one in the style sheets. The first one we'll discuss is watermark in the headers and footers. If you're including your watermark as part of the header or footer, it can utilize the existing templates for headers and footers in static contents at XSL. So those templates, as you saw, all exist already. There are templates to address each part of the document. And a watermark that's included as part of the existing header or footer is just plunked right into the existing template. So for example, you might have you'll find a template called insert body odd footer if you want to make sure that your watermark is included in the odd footers of the body. This first section here might be the default contents of this template. It's saying that it's defining static content and calling a template called insert unit out of footer, which is inserting whatever information it's already inserting in the footer. And then the next line, XSL call template name equals insert watermark, is the line that we're adding here to actually go ahead and insert the watermark. And in insert watermark would be including the text or the image or whatever it is that we want to include in the footer. And then this gets included right in the odd footer of the body. We're going to move on now to discuss how to include a watermark in the side margins. But before we do that, we're going to give a brief overview of the concept of regions in PDF in order to understand how to implement it. XSLFO uses region elements to define the regions of the page. So you see a diagram here on the right that illustrates this. The middle section, FO region body, defines the body. FO region before is the header. FO region after is the footer. FO region start is the sidebar preceding the text. FO region end is the sidebar following the text. And I specifically am noting preceding the text and following the text and not left and right, because this depends on language direction. This is how it would look in a standard left to right language. In a right to left language, it would be flipped with region start on the right and region end on the left. If we want to include a watermark in the side margins, then we're going to need to define new templates in static contents in XSL. So the first step in doing that is that the region before and region after that define the headers and footers are already defined out of the box for each section of the document because they're commonly in use. So we have a file called layout masters.xsl that we'll discuss more in depth later on, but that includes definitions for FO region before and FO region after for each of the document sections. But anytime we want to make use of FO region start or FO region end, we're going to have to add that in a customized version. They're not included out of the box only because they're not commonly used, in order not to clutter up the style sheets with things that most people aren't using. They can be defined along with FO region before and FO region after, just the same. So you see here on the bottom a code snippet showing this. This last line on the bottom, FO region start, is what might appear, what you might be inserting into your layout masters to actually define the region. Extent equals page margin left. You're showing that you're stating here that it takes up the space, the same amount of space that the left page margin is taking up. Display align equals center, that's optional. That's in this code snippet was just defining that everything should be said, the text should be centered in it. And then you see region name equals left watermark. That's a name that you make up. You define what the region name is called, but it's important because it's used otherwhere. It's used in another place, as we'll see in a moment. Moving back to the next bullet, the region name attribute of FO region start must correspond to the flow name attribute of FO static content. So anytime you're defining, you're including something in static content, you're wrapping it in the template in this FO static content. Going back to the first code snippet. So you may have a template here, a custom template called insert body left sidebar. And in it, you're defining that there is some static content being inserted here. The flow name of the static content is left watermark. That corresponds to the region name defined in layout masters. And this is important so that the XSLFO processing engine knows where to put it. When you go on to the next line, XSL call template insert watermark, and you're inserting some text here that says for internal use only. The processing engine will take this text and say, where does it go? It goes in the place called left watermark. Where is this place called left watermark? Let's look for the region called left watermark and see how it's defined. Okay, it's defined that it takes up the space. Defined that it's defined as a region start, meaning it's on the left side of the page. It's defined that it takes up the amount of space defined in page margin left. So, for example, that might be 1 inch. So it knows that it's on the left side of the page and it's a width of 1 inch. Display line equals center, so it knows that it has to be centered. And now it knows where to put the text. That's why these names are completely up to you, but it's very important that they correspond. The flow name of the static content and the region name of the actual region. Again, going over this slide briefly, we just described how to include a watermark in the side margins since there are no side regions defined yet, and since there are no templates to include static content in those side regions defined yet, you need to do both steps. You need to include, you need to define the regions in layout masters. You need to create new templates in static content, and you need to link between the two by using the same flow name and region name, and then insert your watermark that way. And the last use case that we'll look at that might be relevant for a watermark using static content is watermark as an overlay. And the reason there's a difference, we mentioned earlier we lumped overlay and background together, but the important difference is that the static content is going above the text. So if you want to include something as an overlay, putting it in the static content is a convenient way to get it to lie above the text in any section of the document. How would we do that? A watermark included as overlay to text can be included in the existing header or footer templates in an FO block container with absolute positioning. So many of you are probably familiar with the structure of the XSLFO that is then converted into a PDF. It's generally structured into FO blocks. Each FO block will contain, will have attributes defined in it and contain the text. If we wanted to, and the FO blocks are processed in order. They flow one after the other. If we want to take some text and move it out of order into its own special location, an easy way to do that is by wrapping it in an FO block container and saying this FO block container has absolute positioning. Absolute positioning means it's not relative to where it occurs in the flow of the XSLFO. We're defining completely for, it's being defined completely on its own. We'll define where its top is, we'll define where its left is. We can turn it around by using the reference orientation attribute that we saw earlier. We can move it around the page exactly how we want without, and it won't be affected by any of the other content on the page, and it won't affect any of the other content either. So when we might take a big logo that's supposed to lie above the text that covers half the page, and we say we're putting it in the existing header template, it's not really part of the header. We're just utilizing the header template to place it on top of the text. Once we wrap it in an FO block container and define that the FO block container is absolute positioning, it's moved out of the header to wherever we want it. And it's not really part of the header anymore. For example, you see this code snippet, XSL template, name equals insert body even header. This might be a default template that we're customizing. It doesn't have to be even header. It could be even footer. It really doesn't make a difference since we're giving it absolute positioning and moving it to wherever we want on the page. It could be either one, and they both act the same way. The main thing we have to make sure of is that we're including it on both even and odd pages and all document sections as we want. And in this template, we're defining FO static content. The flow name equals even body header. That's the default flow name that's already defined. And we're putting in an FO block container. Position equals absolute. What's the left? Let's say it's 3 inches from the left, 4 inches from the top. Here's the graphic that we're putting in. We can see here we're giving it the URL to the watermark image as the source for the graphic. We're defining that it should be formatted using the watermark attribute set that we should have defined in static content adder, the attributes file that we saw earlier. And that's it. By doing this, this image will move out of the header into an absolute position 3 inches left and 4 inches from the top, and will lie on top of the text on every even body page. The last use case that we mentioned before that we haven't discussed yet, how to implement, is including a watermark as a background. So we can't use the method that we just discussed of putting it into the header or footer because the header or footer lies on top of the text, even though you wouldn't normally notice that because the header and footer ought to be above and below the text and not, they shouldn't overflow onto one another. They are placed on top of the text. So if we want to put in a background, we'll have to use a different method. And in order to understand this method, we're going to give a quick overview of Layout Masters, the Layout Masters section of the PDF style sheets, and just a brief overview on how they're structured and set up so that we can understand where to actually place the code that will create the watermark background. So Layout Masters are used to organize and define the various sections of the document. They're basically the building blocks of the document. The entire document is represented by one FO Layout Master set. There's one created for each document. The FO Layout Master set contains elements called FO Simple Page Master. These elements are used to define the sizes, margins, and regions that we saw before of each document section. These are the building blocks of the document. And the FO Layout Master set also contains FO Page Sequence Master elements, which reference the simple page masters and put them together to build each document section. I know that was very technical and very wordy. And again, we'll move away from the slides for a minute to look at the actual files and hopefully understand them a little better. I'll just wait for everyone's screens to catch up with mine. Here we see the FO layout master set. We see that there are a number of FO simple page masters defined, which define the regions of the document. The attribute sets that are being referenced here are defining the sizes of these regions, the margins, the sizes of the margins. Scrolling down, we see a new set of elements called FO Page Sequence Master. There's one for each section of the document. There's one called Top Sequence, one called Body Sequence. And these page sequence masters are putting together the simple page masters, talk first, talk last, talk odd, talk even, that we defined above, in order to put the document together. As before, as always, there's another file, a corresponding file called Layout Masters Adder, which contains the attribute sets being referenced by Layout Masters and defines the margins for each section, etc. So how would, moving back to the slides, how would we use these files in order to create a watermark as a background? A background image can be included on each relevant FO region in Layout Masters.xsl to create a watermark. Relevant attributes should be collected and defined in a new XSL attribute set in Layout Masters Adder.xsl. So, for example, in an existing FO region body, which already has the margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right defined, like this, we'd be adding in a new little piece here, background image equals watermark URL. Replacing the background image right on the FO region body, and that will make sure that it appears on every single page of the body, every single page of whichever simple page master this is. So if this is a watermark that I want to appear throughout the main content, I'll make sure that it goes into the body simple page masters. If it's something I want to appear in everything, I'll make sure that it goes into the body simple page masters, and the talk simple page masters, and the index simple page masters. Every relevant one will have this background image defined in the FO region body. So what did we discuss in this section? We discussed how to include the watermark in static content. We gave an overview of static content, discussed how to include the watermark in the headers and footers, gave an overview of regions, and discussed how to include the watermark in the side margins, and how to include the watermark as an overlay. We also discussed how to include it as a background to text, gave an overview of the Layout Masters, and specifically how to implement the watermark as a background in Layout Masters. The last topic we want to discuss is an optional watermark. You often might want to include a watermark only in some circumstances, such as a draft watermark, a watermark showing that this is something only for internal use, or this is only a specific type of publication. That we'll discuss using an AMP parameter to conditionally display the watermark. You can either choose an existing parameter or create a custom parameter. We'll discuss adding a condition to the watermark display based on that parameter, and finally sending the parameter and the value to the DITA OT so that it all gets processed. Choosing an existing parameter. There might very well be an existing AMP parameter, which is logically correct for your requirements. If you're talking about a draft watermark, there's an existing AMP parameter called arg.draft. And you need to determine if there is an existing AMP parameter that will work for you, what its name is, and what the name of the parameter is as passed to the style sheets, because they're often not the same. For example, arg.draft is what it's called when it gets sent to the DITA OT, but when it's passed to the style sheets, it's called draft. The detailed documentation on available parameters is included in each version of the DITA OT. So you can check your documentation that goes with your version of the DITA OT in order to see what parameters are available for you, what they're called in the various places, and if any will work for you. If none of the existing parameters work for you, then you can also define a custom parameter. For example, you want a watermark that's based on whether this is protected content or not. So how would you do that? In the transform topic to PDF init target, you need to add a property defining your custom parameter. Property name equals protect content. Don't give it a value because the value will be passed in from when calling the DITA OT. In the transform topic to fo.main target, add a parameter to the XSLT task, which includes your custom parameter value. So you might write param name equals protect content expression equals protect content. That's the same name that you gave the property above. And an important note is that this is based on the latest version of the DITA OT currently, but the names of the actual targets and tasks might differ slightly from each other in earlier versions. So if it's a different version of the DITA OT, you'll need to check exactly how to implement it, how it correlates to the latest version. And last, define parameter and basic settings.xsl in your customized style sheets. In basic settings.xsl, you just need to define param name equals protect content so that the style sheets recognize it and so that you can use it. Next, what you need to do is add a condition to the watermark display. Wherever you have the watermark included in your style sheet, as we discussed in the previous sections, you'll want to wrap that logic in a condition testing the value of the parameter that you just passed in. So for example, in your template insert watermark, you might add XSL if draft equals true and product equals presentation. This is based on two parameters. And then you're only including the watermark if that is correct, if this value is to true. Last, you need to send the parameter and the value to the DITA OT. When you're actually calling the DITA OT, you add in your parameter and the value for it, whether it's an existing one, whether it's a custom one. This is if you're just calling the DITA OT from the command line. If you're using a CMS to call it, then you'll need to configure it together with your CMS vendor, and as each CMS works differently. Some CMS solutions already have a lot of the existing parameters configured in the CMS, particularly arg.draft. So that's something to make sure to ask them about. So we've discussed using the AMP parameter to conditionally display the watermark, choosing an existing one or defining a custom one, adding the condition to the watermark display, and then finally making sure that that parameter and the value gets sent to the DITA OT. Back to our main topics, we've covered watermark design, how to actually include the watermark, and how to make that watermark optional based on your requirements. And thank you everyone for coming and for attending today. Feel free to be in touch with us for more information about this or any other topic. And we'll be happy to hear your questions offline also.